Okay, good morning. Welcome to Talking Smart, conversations with colleagues in philosophy and education from around the world. My guest today is Walter Omar Kohan. He is a professor at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. He holds his PhD from Ibero-Americana University in Mexico City, and which was monitored by Matt Lipman. Did a postdoctoral degree at the University of Paris 8, and is, I think we said that already, a professor at State University Rio de Janeiro, and an author of a number of books. And I will post the biographical notes when we set the YouTube thing online. So,
Right.
Walter.
Don't
So,
worry.
oh pardon me. I'm going to see if I can turn this machine off here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Mort.
Well, this is a great pleasure, and it's been a long time that we've actually seen each other in person. I think it was North Carolina, right?
I think so. Wow, that was a long time ago.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But it's kind of nice because I sort of feel we haven't lost total contact, and so it was a pleasure to review the book that you and Barbara edited, and that. So tell me a little bit, maybe tell me a little bit about that project that you did with Barbara, just as a little review for readers who may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, well, that book was, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. It's a pleasure to be with you again. And let me tell you that that book was a result, or one of the results of postdoctoral or visiting scholarship that I have at the British Columbia University with Barbara Weber. So it's like a result of our worries and questions and ideas about the connection between childhood, time, and thinking. And it was also an opportunity to bring some other colleagues to the conversation and to the thinking together.
Yes. And did you did all of the people participate in person to some degree and during this?
No, it was not all the people in person, but there were some colleagues working with us at the UBC and some other colleagues from other places that we bring together with like a general or a common agenda or a common worry about this relationship.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing I would like to just explore with you, and maybe get some viewers who aren't familiar with your journal. You and David Kennedy have a wonderful journal that you've been doing for how many years now?
Well, Childhood and Philosophy was originally created in 2005 by David and myself, so it's like 18 years.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, it has been growing a lot, and I think that now it's quite a well-established journal in the field, and also it's included in bases as Scopus and Web of Science. So it's getting more and more acknowledgement academically.
Yes. And tell me a little bit about how you started it.
Well, we were close friends with David from the beginning. I think that we were close, the three of us, when we both met.
Mm-hmm.
And with David, we have this idea that it could be nice to have a place specifically focused on childhood and its relations to philosophy, both in terms of the practice of philosophy with children, but also the philosophical approaches to childhood.
Mhm.
But that time we had thinking, the Journal of Philosophy for Children. We also had analytic teaching
Mhm.
by yourself. We had creative and critical thinking, the Australian journal. We also have in Spanish and Italian, but we thought that none of those was so focused on childhood. So that's why, in fact, childhood is first, and it's named Childhood and Philosophy.
Yes, yes. Well, and if I remember, I think that was something of David's original dissertation, I think, was on childhood. If I,
I'm not sure about that. No, I'm not sure. Eh?
I'm not sure either, but I know it's much of his early work focused on that, and he continues to have that as one of his major focuses, is the understanding of childhood from multiple perspectives. And
Right. Even though, in fact, from the beginning, we both tried to avoid to publish at the journal. So the journal has been changing its form in the actual site. The archives presented from the beginning. There was a section that we don't have anymore where we made like an ontology of some philosopher about childhood. So each issue we devoted to a philosopher and its relationship to childhood. We have some literature pieces, but we try to avoid to be our own voice at the journal.
yes.
It tend to be more and more academic, I should say, and now it's a journal that publishes like 40 articles a year in several languages, English, but also Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and French, and German. And usually we have like 1 or 2 dossiers every year.
Mhm.
So we have had the past and present of philosophy for children, philosophy and childhood beyond and across the disciplines. And we are also planning different dossiers for the next issues. One about childism and philosophical practices with children. One other about race and gender issues in the practice of philosophy for children. And also one about colonization and decolonization of childhood and political dimension of relationships to childhood. So we are quite hopeful and anxious about the next.
Yes. Well, tell me a little bit. Tell me a little bit about childism.
Well, childism, it's an institute directed by John Wall, and I participated in a couple of roundtables. We have just published yesterday a paper on childism in a journey of policy for education, policies for education, and it's something. Well, childism puts the child as at the center.
Okay.
And it's like a movement like resisting or confronting adultism. So it's a movement about trying to give the child another place in society that the one that our adultocentric societies give.
Yes, yes. No, that's a very, I hadn't heard the phrase before, I guess, and so it has obviously multiple implications, but centers around the idea of placing the child sort of in the middle of things in terms of how one attends to children.
Right,
Right.
right.
Very interesting. Well, Well, and again, that's going to be an interesting piece. I want to ask you, and maybe and I may be wrong about this, but I do remember reading an article by you many years back, and I don't know even how many, where you had some very interesting dialogues with, I think, high school kids in Korea. Do you?
Right, right,
And
yes.
what struck me about that, if my memory is correct, what struck me about that was that those discussions tended to be much more in depth and much more grounded in, I don't know, the work of traditional philosophers than any other discussion that I've run into with children. I mean, it seemed like it was a more of a academic, I mean, it was a really deep discussion.
Yeah,
And just tell me a little bit more about that process, because I guess I was sort of envious of that work when you did it, and I thought it's really challenging to get young students thinking with such depth about these issues.
right. Well, that was an attempt. I mean, it was an exercise of a practice in the context of an attempt to work with philosophical texts in the sense of
Yes.
texts by philosophers with children. And that was mainly, if I remember well, also it was with some fragments of Heraclitus.
Yeah, yes.
And also with some scraps of Plato's Apology of Socrates, or maybe other dialogues. So we wrote here a couple of books with an artist. We made some figures that we call thinking with. So it was thinking with Heraclitus, thinking with Socrates.
Mm.
We also had thinking with Foucault and thinking with Deleuze. And it was an attempt. We put just one sentence on or one fragment in a page, and the illustration of an artist, so that in that experience we try to put the kids in direct contact with philosophical texts, with no mediation, no interpretation, no explanation. And it was very nice, usually because also Heraclitus is very powerful in a sense. It's like the childhood of philosophy, not only in chronological sense, not only because Heraclitus is at the beginning of the history of Western philosophy, but also because of the power of the strength of the, I would say, the childlike way of thinking that Heraclitus presents as if we were thinking for the first time like a child.
Yes. Well, when you were talking about that, it really struck me that it just reminded me of one of the first things I read from Paulo Freire, which was Education for Critical Consciousness.
Right.
And his use of he used the anthropological technique of going into the back areas and use the pictures to engage in philosophical discussions. And it sounds a little bit like what you did with the fragment in the picture, so that created a context. And it was and so did you have that in mind when you were working on some of those?
Not really. It's very interesting that you're pointing it out, because at that time I was not at all aware of that. And but you're right, yeah, because Freire usually, I've been recently in visiting those places where Freire began his literacy experiences, and you're right. He used the artist Brenard, which was a French artist living in Pernambuco, and wonderful drawings and pieces of art. And he present them. Yeah, you are right. This is So this is something in common than and you know that we are working now in an idea. It's very important what you are saying, because now we are inspiring Freire. We are developing now a program we call philosophical literacy. So this is something we should consider again. This way that art makes it it's like a road to thinking, to questioning, and to philosophical approach to reality. Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Well, you know, that I think that's probably my favorite book of Freire. And I mean, I still remember that so well, and I remember some of the drawings. I remember that first drawing in particular, with the peasants in the well, and then that's where I first heard him writing about saying, we cannot teach people to read unless they can first do philosophy. Um, and I that's just such a powerful idea, and so well developed in that education of critical consciousness, I thought. So it's well, anyway, that's
Yeah,
a
you know that there's something interesting with Freire's books that I I I I met this thing when my first book on Freire was translated into English, because we have to go after the English translations. And you know that, for example, there's no book in Portuguese with that title, is it? Or critical. That's why I was trying to think, and this happens often. So in English, Freire books, some of them are the same books with other titles, but many of them are not even the same book. So that sometimes they put together half of one book and half of another, and they make one edition in English, or sometimes they take out some parts, or they put, for example, there's a famous something that I was so surprised when I read The Pedagogy of the Oppressed in English, because the very last phrase, which is so important in Portuguese, in the original Portuguese, is not in the English edition. And the last thing that Freire says is something like, in Portuguese, if nothing remains from this book, at least it will remain my faith in the people, and my faith in that it will be possible to build a world where it will be less difficult to love. This is the last sentence. So love is the last word of the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is something very important. But this phrase is not in the English edition. And then found it in the preface, or in the introduction, very close in the same phrase. So I'm not sure what kind of things they do with with Freire's works, that they look very different in English.
Well, from what little I've read about translation, apparently it is very much an art, and so there's no such thing as a what perfect translation, because
Right. It's not
all
the same.
always something of the translator in there, and always something. Yeah, no, that is fascinating, though, and of course I suffer greatly because I really am a single language person. I know a smattering of phrases from all kinds of places, but I really don't know any other language even half well. So, and I know it's a great detriment, and I always feel sad that, well, my mother was second generation Polish, and but they were so intent in the United States about not being anything but American. And so all of those possibilities of learning Polish and probably a little German were sort of hidden because we were American. So it was a sad loss, I think. So anyway, wow. That's very interesting. Our conversation. I didn't know where we were going to go, and we've covered some very interesting. So so um, so I was those three projects that you're working on with the book. Any other thing that is of particular interest to you right now?
Sorry, can you repeat
You
the question?
talked about the three projects that are coming up for your journal, but
Right.
anything else that strikes your fancy at the moment?
You mean in terms of the journal?
Yeah. As the journal or anything else?
Yeah, well, now, as I told you, we are, I mean, as you know, I work in the Center for the Study of Philosophies and Childhoods in the State University of Rio, and we are mainly focused on teacher education practices and also going to public schools to help teachers to explore the philosophical dimension of their practice. So we have moved also from a chronological understanding of childhood to an ionic understanding. So childhood for us is not just or not mainly a stage of life, but it's mainly an experience of time. So it's like a dimension of human experience at any age. Childhood for us is not about age, but about time. So we are working with children of all ages, different ages. And for example, next week, we'll go to the state of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil, the state where Paulo Freire began, in fact, his literacy program. And inspired by Freire, we are working in what we call a philosophical literacy program. That so next week, a group of a team of people of my group, we will be the whole 8 hours a day, one whole week, working with like 2,000 of educators of illiterate people.
Oh my.
To work, because at this state, the Secretary of Education has realized the importance of fostering of founding the literacy process in a philosophical literacy. So we practically works some principles of philosophical literacy, like, for example, listening or questioning or thinking with others. So it's a very practical, it's like a set of workshops where we try to invite literacy teachers to explore the philosophical dimension of the literacy process. So that makes me very exciting, very hopeful in terms of the educational consequences of such activities.
Well, maybe maybe it's maybe a good place to end. It's just about up with a half hour, but just to explore a little bit, my sense is that an opportunity for a project like that may be something that sort of came out of your recent political election with Lulu back in office, and that's
Well, things in Brazil are very, now we are hoping, because we have had like horrible years, very hopeless years, and very destroying years to education, to the health system. And unfortunately, we have some especially women at the secretaries of education, very committed, very strong women,